regarding the overview. Well, state of exception. Actually, counter plan, then state of exception. And then the EPA and politics. You're going to vote after this round based on the solvency deficit to the counterplan and the state of exception and advantage. The plan, it just links just as much to the disadvantages, and they're just not doing enough work telling you why a distinguished decision is going to be perceived differently than an overrule. All of these are based on the perception of Congress, or based on the perception of, or based on the public's, acceptance of the court to be able to, spend its own political capital. And in that world, when they are claiming their solvency from doing exactly the same thing as the plan in the current system, it's always going to have the same link. I mean, they're just not answering that argument good enough. And so in that world, you are going to defer to the gear with evidence and the state of exception advantage, because they are not solving for that. They never answer back the arguments on the Michelson, the cards in specific, and we'll get to that in a moment. Again, she says there's no analysis on why distinguishing is different. They just pull through the one card they have from the block, which isn't even particularly good, saying that it is somehow different in the legal proceedings, but they are based on this perception of what the other branches of the government are going to think of their plan. And so in that world, when they are claiming that they do the same exact thing in the status quo as a result of this decision, they are always going to link just as much to this disadvantage. Or to all of their disadvantages, either that or they don't have any solvency. So in that world, you would prefer the plan both ways. And then on the bottom, she says on the bottom that they have the chance of solving for rights, but in the world that the rights the deficit in rights stems from the fact that the law is not plugging up the legal loophole that allows for the president to take away the rights of unlawful combatants. Means that they absolutely cannot solve for rights. They can just further make more of these loopholes to I mean, they're just adding to the problem in that world. And yeah, I mean, again, the only argument she's extending here is on why distinguishing is different, and then she reads this distinguishing card, but this is the worst case of power tagging that I've ever seen. The card doesn't actually say anything about what she claims. It's just ridiculous evidence. And I mean, it just intrinsically makes sense that the politics links is based entirely on what Congress thinks of the Supreme Court decision, and the world that the policy implications of the decision are exactly the same as if it was an overrule that is still going to go into effect. And on the EPA versus Massachusetts, the same thing applies. As long as they are making this big step that is going to cause such big changes in the status quo, they're not going to have the political capital they need to pass the decision. State of exception. Again, she doesn't even go to this in her last speech, so you're going to prefer our argument that the Michelson and Agamben evidence is showing you that this is going to be the place where you're going to vote. There is specific reasons that I've covered on the counterplan flow why they can't capture this advantage, because they are not addressing the issues inherent in this card, that just the harm is coming here from the fact that the president has the power to do this in the status quo, or with the laws in the status quo, and they are not plugging up the ability to do that in any way, shape, or form. So this is going to serve as a weight against their sort of deontology arguments that, well, even if you are going to use the util framework, you're going to look to this because our risk of solving this is greater than the risk that the counterplan doesn't link to the disadvantages. EPA. All right, you can extend my uniqueness that the courts are not going to rule for the agency, and again, also just extend the argument on the bottom that our impacts are always going to outweigh this, especially in the world that this is going to link to the counterplan links to this just as much. The specific link here is that the plan is going to drain the court's political capital to make decisions later, but again, that's answered on the other flow, that you just can't, I mean, when the end result is the same, they're going to spend just as much political capital. Politics. All right, even if you give her the benefit of the non-uniqueness here and give her that this is the most concise scenario for a nuclear war, we are still going to outweigh on the rights advantage, because this it links even more. They can make an argument that the overrule is going to make a difference in the courts, in the link to the EPA, just because that is dealing more insularly with the Supreme Court. But there is no way that the link is not exactly the same here as it, for the counterplan as it is for the plan in the world. That it's what Congress thinks the court's doing. Congress isn't going to make that distinction between distinguish and overrule if they're going to be doing the exact same policy action in the status quo. And then on the deontology nuclear war debate on the bottom. Again, even if you want to evaluate the nuclear war impacts first, the risk of their acknowledgement of rights as still important, and our greater risk of solving, or our greater ability, the greater ability of the plan to solve for rights than the chance that the counterplan does not link to the disadvantages is going to outweigh that anyway. So, I mean, in the world that this nuclear war is still going to happen, you're always going to vote on the affirmative side on the risk that you can solve for these rights abuses in the status quo, and in the long term, and you plugging up, I mean, in answering the warrants of the Mickelson and the Gombin evidence that, I mean, and that is going to outweigh, because there's more of a risk that we're solving there than that they don't link to the disadvantage.